Hello, and thank you for joining us for Northwest Newsweek. We're back after a short hiatus, and we'll bring you stories from the past few weeks in this episode. We'll start things off at the Musselwhite Gold Mine, which is celebrating its 25th anniversary. The remote mine site has produced 5 million ounces of gold since it opened in 1997, and officials are looking forward to 5 to 10 more years of production. Lee Noonan was at Musselwhite for the anniversary event.
The Musselwhite mine began production a quarter century ago. The mine's new general manager, Mark Kiesling, says it was that lengthy lifespan, as well as the mine's community values, that drew him to the job.
25 years ago, this mine was kind of a founding operation around Indigenous partnerships. So we got the Musselwhite Agreement put in place, and that's gotten strong community relations.
Frank McKay is council chair and CEO of Windigo First Nations Council, which represents 2 of the 4 communities that are signatory to the Musselwhite Agreement. He was present during the original negotiations.
The elder, late Norman Patayash, whose treaty was that, he had a vision that this would be a good thing for his community.
McKay says jobs, training, and business opportunities at the mine have indeed benefited the local communities, but that more needs to be done to support workers and make long-term employment more viable. He also wants to see the compensation for displaced trappers updated in keeping with the cost of living. The MPP for the area, Saul Mamakwa, echoes the sentiment, saying he's here to celebrate the mine's history, but that there's always room for improvement.
I see the housing conditions, the poverty that exists within the First Nations, and again, that's why I say we need to do better. We can do better. We must do better.
Kiesling says community partnerships have helped the mine as well as the First Nations, saying those relationships are one high point from the mine's history, along with reaching the 5 million ounces mark and the mine's sheer longevity.
Some mines don't even make it 10 years, but to have a mine with 25 years and a runway ahead of us to continue to produce is really fantastic, and it's exciting. Some of the lows, certainly the past few years in the pandemic has been tough on the operation. And then back in 2019, we had a conveyor fire, and that's been certainly a low.
The ups and downs over the years have also included several tragedies at the mine site. We spoke to some longtime mine workers about the early days here at Musselwhite.
We stayed at a conference tent with the plywood on the side, plywood on the floor. That's how it was.
When I got here, there was no airport. There was just building the road, and this is kitchen number 5 that I've actually worked in.
We've got a chance to see a lot of growth and change and a lot of successes and challenges.
Lee Noonan, TBT News.
One person has died after the plane they were piloting crashed near Kenora on September 21st. The amateur-built aircraft collided with the ground on Shore Island on Lake of the Woods. There were no other occupants, and the pilot's name has not been released. Kenora OPP and the Transportation Safety Board are investigating. The TSB later confirmed that the flight originated from Minnesota. The chief of the Ojibways of the Omagamin First Nation was calling it racism after paramedics allegedly parked at the edge of the reserve while a man in his community died while waiting for medical help. The incident occurred on September 15th, and according to a report from APTN, one of the paramedics told Chief Jeff Kopanens that he'd been attacked on the reserve in the past. Kopanens took his outcry public, saying on Twitter, "Today, a young First Nations man died in Omagamin. 911 was called. The ambulance parked at the edge of our reserve and wouldn't come help. And his family provided chest compressions. The paramedics let this young man die. This is racism." This photo allegedly shows the ambulance parked outside the community. The ambulance would fall under the jurisdiction of the Kenora District Services Board. In a written statement, CAO Henry Wall called the incident tragic, saying they will fully review what happened and have requested a Ministry of Health investigation. Minister of Indigenous Services, Patty Haidu, commented on Twitter saying, "Not being able to access urgent care is unacceptable. The investigation remains ongoing." A disturbing video which appears to show a police officer assaulting a First Nation man in Slate Falls earlier this month could lead to some serious repercussions for the members of the Anishinaabe-Aski Police Service. NAPS officials declined to comment as the incident is now being investigated by the OPP. Mitchell Ringos reports.
This cell phone video shows the NAPS officer standing over Slate Falls First Nation resident James Massakiash after it appears he was punched in the back of the head and thrown to the ground. Slate Falls is located about 150 kilometers north of Sioux Lookout. Massakiash's sister, Miriam Cook, was in another northern community at the time. She says relatives have called NAPS to bring her brother home after he had too much to drink, something NAPS officers normally do peacefully.
When they're called to residence and they take them home, talk to the person and get them to go to bed. I think that's their first initial step that they try to do, that I've seen officers do anyway in my community.
Now, that did not happen this time around, as the officer could be seen yelling at Massakiash, saying, "Get yourself up or I'll drag you." He did eventually get up and stumbled forward to the police pickup truck, where the situation quickly escalated. Cook later took her brother to Sioux Lookout to see a doctor amid fears of a head injury, and there were visible injuries to his face.
We're waiting to follow up with another doctor next week for him, but psychologically he's got some stuff bothering him, I guess, with everything going on.
NAPS Chief Roland Morrison has declined to comment, but in an email, NAPS has confirmed that they requested the OPP to investigate the incident, and the officer in question has been placed on administrative duties. The head of the union for NAPS officers, Jason Storkson, also says he cannot comment on the incident as it's under investigation, but he does say this highlights the need for body cams for NAPS officers, who often work alone in remote communities for days on end. Cook hopes the serious repercussions will come from the OPP investigation.
Our young First Nations people from officers who use excessive force like this in the video footage. And I speak up on behalf of everyone who may have encountered something like this, and I'm sure there's more out there. People may be afraid to speak up.
Cook adds she's not sure what's going to come out of the investigation, but says going forward her brother and family will be cooperating with the OPP, and she hopes the officer is eventually charged. Mitchell Ringos, TPT News.
Large-scale power transmission projects in the province will now bring an opportunity for 50-50 First Nations equity. Hydro One recently announced that a model first used in northwestern Ontario will now be applied to all transmission projects valued over $100 million.
Hydro One will partner 50-50 with First Nations on equity for all new large-scale transmission line projects.
Once complete, the Waasigan transmission line will run from Thunder Bay to Dryden through Atikokan. It was the first Hydro One project to offer nearby First Nations the option to invest up to 50%. That equity model is now being applied to 5 new transmission projects in southwestern Ontario.
Hydro One has not always gotten it right. But today, I'm proud to stand here with you all as we mark the beginning of a new path. One forged in equal partnership with the original stewards of the land. We know that actions speak so much louder than words, and today we are taking one of the boldest economic reconciliation actions in Canada.
All the previous chiefs and previous councils that worked ever since the treaty was signed, they have undauntedly said we need to be partners and to uphold the treaty as a 50-50 partner. And I'd like to acknowledge that Hydro One is making this step, this giant step, and also to make an example to other proponents that this has to happen.
Wabigoon Lake is one of the 8 First Nations that signed the Waasigan Agreement last spring. Another hit to the bank account is coming, this time for Enbridge Gas customers here in the Northwest. The Ontario Energy Board has approved a rate increase that will take effect on October 1st. It will add about $90 a year to a typical household bill for natural gas.
The market price for natural gas has increased a number of times over the past year, predominantly due to the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. Also, we see more gas that's being exported by liquefied natural gas to areas like Europe, who are currently constrained and having natural gas. As a result, those prices have gone up.
Stas encourages anyone who's struggling to pay their bill to reach out to the utility to arrange a payment plan. Enbridge is also asking customers to submit their own monthly meter readings if possible. Typically, meter readings are done by employees every other month, but due to staffing challenges, that's now happening less frequently. It's forced the utility to rely more heavily on estimates based off historical usage. Those who've undertaken recent renovations in particular could be in for a surprise once Enbridge is able to do in-person readings.
Have there been any changes to your consumption? If you put in a pool heater, if you have, added different appliances, also if you've undertaken some energy efficiency initiatives that might have reduced your gas, you might want to think about submitting an estimate so that you can be closer to what your actual use is.
Stas notes all bills will be adjusted in time to reflect a customer's actual gas usage. More details are available on the Enbridge website. The name Noront Resources is no more. The mining company with a large percentage of the claims in the Ring of Fire was purchased by an Australia-based Wyloo Metals in April, and the parent company has now decided to give its Canadian acquisition a new name that reflects its prime area of development. Noront will now be known as Ring of Fire Metals. Wyloo officials say they highly value the rich history associated with the Ring of Fire region and its importance to Canada's critical minerals future. The company also announced plans to resume drilling and exploration activity near the site of its planned Eagle's Nest mine. 44 new employees have been hired, with half of them coming from Martin Falls, Webequie, Arrowland, and Niskandica First Nations. Officials with Noront Resources spent around 20 years exploring and assessing the Eagle's Nest deposit, which is rich in nickel, copper, platinum, and palladium. Wyloo officials say they plan to upgrade the work site as the future mine gets closer to development. Coming up after the break, we've got a look at a new docu-series focusing on the Great Lakes, which includes some unique aspects of this region. A new three-part docuseries has been produced by TV Ontario called Great Lakes Untamed, and a Thunder Bay cinematographer played a big part in it, as a large portion of the series focuses on Lake Superior. Avery McRae has the story.
This is the story of the largest watershed on the planet.
Never before has there been a production about the Great Lakes quite like this. The three-part series, with each episode an hour in length, will share stories and tales from the 5 Great Lakes, with around 30% of the series to be focused on the grandest of the 5 bodies of water, Lake Superior. Local director Damien Gilbert, who provided much of the footage from the North Shores of Superior for the doc, has spent over 15 years in the industry and says this one hits close to home, and he feels anyone in the city will be able to relate to what they are viewing.
It's the greatest lake in the world, and they might, recognize some of the locations that are featured in this docuseries.
Gilbert said while shooting the series, which is 3 years in the making, he was able to experience many amazing sights the average person doesn't have access to, like being in the base of Wilmette Canyon and a unique view of one of the most famous attractions in our region.
So one particular location was Kakabeka Falls, and I got a really unique perspective of it flying with the drone, which we got permission to do, was to kind of start and then kind of go down into the gorge. So when you're seeing it from the platforms, you're not getting it from that perspective, and you might not even recognize it at first.
There was also some interesting discoveries made during shooting, none more so than these rocks that originate from Marathon, known as Uperlites, which glow a fiery orange when shined with a UV light.
Given GPS coordinates and try to find these things in the pitch dark and then shining lights and not finding anything, and all of a sudden this rock kind of started glowing, and it's like, wow, what is this?
The docuseries aired this past week on TVO, and all 3 episodes are now available to stream on TVO and YouTube. Avery McRae, TBT News.
A group opposed to a proposal to dispose of nuclear waste deep underground here in northwestern Ontario held a protest walk earlier this month. More than 50 people, including members of Nuclear Free Thunder Bay and like-minded community members, walked from federal MP Patty Haidu's office to the office of provincial MPP Lise Vaugeois. They're concerned about the possibility of storing nuclear waste in this region. The Nuclear Waste Management Organization will choose between 2 potential sites for an underground repository. One is near Nignace, and the other is in southern Ontario. Rally organizers Dottie Lagazik and Charles Foss say there are just too many unknown consequences. They also don't believe that NWMO is being transparent about the process.
We have a major concern with the siting process that they've undertaken, which is, as I said, not a legislative or regulatory requirement. It's a public relations exercise where they are looking for an impoverished community like Ignace to accept them as a willing host for this project.
This was one of a number of walks taking place in September across the Northwest. Canada has no laws prohibiting drag queens and kings, yet Dryden OPP questioned a local pride organizer at her workplace earlier this month. The officer was investigating what she says was not a serious complaint, but rather a homophobic attempt to shut down a drag storytime event scheduled for September 18th.
We are, approaching this as a hate crime, and we are going to be taking action.
Catherine Keavening, chair of Rainbow Alliance Dryden, says in addition to being questioned at her office, she received calls from multiple venues about homophobic complaints they received about upcoming drag events, particularly the one at the Dryden Library, which featured performers who regularly hold storytime events at the library in Thunder Bay. Keavening says she is disappointed by the police response and feels the OPP let a bigoted person waste police time and resources.
It just felt like we had done something wrong, instead of this person who was calling because they were like, I'm not down with the queer community, or exposing children to human beings who want to read children's stories to them, all up in makeup and wigs.
A Dryden OPP spokesperson said they could not yet comment on the issue. The drag event went ahead as scheduled, with Keavening emphasizing that their events are family-friendly. Time now for another short break. When we come back, we've got a story about the Wake the Giant Music Festival. The 2022 Wake the Giant Music Festival was another huge success. The all-day concert on September 16th was a welcoming event for Indigenous students at DFC High School and attracted thousands of people to Thunder Bay's Marina Park. Jonathan Wilson has the story.
Come on, Barbie, let's go party.
The European pop group Aqua had the big crowd dancing and singing along at this third installment of the Wake the Giant Music Festival, especially when they played their 1990s hit song, Barbie Girl. And even though the festival grounds were a bit wet and muddy from Friday's heavy rainstorms, the weather held off for most of Saturday's all-day concert, save for a bit of fog and mist towards the later stages, as captured by our TBT News drone camera flying over Marina Park.
Very excited that the rain held off today. It was a tough week of setup, but really the weather showed up. We've been lucky, very fortunate throughout the years to have really nice weather on game day, and once again, horseshoes up our butt.
Canadian rock legends Our Lady Peace capped off the big concert, which brings together Indigenous and non-Indigenous music fans as part of a cultural awareness project organized by teachers and staff at DFC. Despite all the big names on the bill, one of the highlights of the night was a performance by third-year student Malachi Beardy, a self-taught pianist who performed his own composition in front of the biggest crowd of his life.
It was overwhelming. It's not what I expected. It really put me in my comfort because I was very self-conscious, but when everyone cheered, I felt at home and I felt really good. It made me feel really comfortable to play.
We got to see Malachi Beardy perform today live on stage right after one of our biggest acts, and how cool was that? Like, the crowd was going crazy for him, and we probably made that kid's one of the best memories in his life to this point, right? So that's what it's all about.
This was the biggest turnout yet for Wake the Giant, with an estimated 6,000 fans at one point. But Spenrath says it will take some time to decide if they're able to bring it back again next September.
I don't want to confirm that yet. Like, we go back every year and we talk about it as a committee and then with our bosses, and yeah, we'll figure it out.
Jonathan Wilson, TBT News.
Thunder Bay Rainy River MP Marcus Pulowski was in the Sioux Narrows area recently to announce nearly $3 million in upgrades to a First Nation school. Pulowski joined Big Grassy River Chief Lynn Indian and project officials to announce the federal funding for the Pegamagabu School. The project includes a rooftop solar panel system, high-efficiency windows, and a 200 square meter expansion to create a new kindergarten classroom and an Ojibwe language classroom. Another large piece of the former Resolute Mill in Fort Frances came crashing down last week. The boiler at the old plant was toppled by crews with Canadian National Demolition at around 5 a.m. on September 23rd, apparently catching a lot of residents by surprise. The boiler itself has been a source of controversy as the province provided the company with $23 million to build it in 2009. The Liberal government then forgave the loan after Resolute closed the mill in 2014. And now the investment has become scrap. The demolition began in early 2021, and it was another large implosion that brought down the Kraft mill last fall. The entire site cleanup was expected to take 18 to 22 months and is now getting closer to completion. Thank you for joining us for Northwest Newsweek. We hope to see you back again.